My name is Richard Lee, and the recording is in progress. And I'm Associate Dean of Libraries, and very exciting to welcome you all. And Lorcan Dempsey is a librarian who has worked for libraries, nonprofits, and educational organizations in Ireland, the UK, and the US. His influence on library directions in the US, Europe, and around the world is widely recognized. Make sure you have that right. He has overseen national library and information programs in the UK and has managed 2 internationally recognized library R&D units. He has been responsible for innovative network information systems, there's more, and he has overseen a variety of memberships and governance activities as well as operational services. He's currently the Professor of Practice and Distinguished Practitioner in Residence at the UW's iSchool. He worked for over 20 years at OCLC, and before this, he worked for a national educational infrastructure and innovation organization in the UK. He began his library career in public libraries in Dublin, Ireland, where he grew up. He has been awarded an honorary doctorate by the Open University at the UK and an IFLA medal, the Miles Conrad Award, and other honors in recognition of his contribution to library development around the world. Most importantly, he was also on our AI task force in libraries. That was the best claim.
Okay. Thank you. Myself and Richard have got very close, literally. Thank you very much for that. This is a presentation that I've done a couple of times recently externally, and Cindy suggested that it might be nice to do a version of it internally. So that is what we are doing, and I need the mouse to go onto the screen. So this is me. Now that I'm in my current situation, I never know quite what to call myself. So that's my current label. Also, distinguished practitioner in residence is sort of a rather grand title. But after having developed a course last year for the first time and then done the management course. At the end of the year, it felt more like I was the extinguished practitioner in residence. Anyway, so to begin, this is ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT for a joke. Sure, how about this one? Why did the librarian get along so well with the AI? Because both have a lot of search history. Ho, 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 ho. Feel free to use this joke. So the significant thing about this is this. This is a terrible joke, and it was my 12th attempt. So this is the 12th joke. So this was the best joke. The first 11 I threw away. Why didn't I throw away the 12th one, you wonder? But, you know, it's interesting. So we're going to talk about a little bit of some background, a little bit about artificial intelligence, and a little bit about libraries. And I'm going to try and go quite quickly because I have quite a few slides. The caveat at the beginning, and you're all experienced of this, you know, we have disappointing results coexist with massive hype and investment. A lot of use is reported use. A lot of reported use is experimental trial pilot. So when you see discussions about all of this use, a lot of it is somebody tried it once and never tried it again, or somebody has a pilot within their organization and is doing. So very difficult to get a handle on what people are actually doing. I very much like Wanda Orlikowski, and she has this article about deploying technologies at scale and says that typically, you end up with both productive and problematic factors here, and this is very clear in this situation. And we know that something else is going to come, that the current generative AI has had a huge impact, but is limited in various ways. So things will come after that. This is the presentation for those of you who read quickly. I have hidden some slides at a later last night that we'll put it up somewhere if actually the violet looks very nice, doesn't it, in this view? Yeah. Okay. How many of you have seen this cartoon? So I got this through Ethan Mollick, whom some of you probably follow, who has become a sort of leading commentator on AI. And he makes the point that, if you wanted to make, it's obscure by the video for us, if you wanted to make the point, you could say, add a learning objective, or what does he say? The more intense example is to add, and that teaches a lesson about astronomy appropriate, and it teaches a lesson about astronomy appropriate for a 5-year-old. So may seem far-fetched, but we'll come back to it in a minute. One of the interesting signals, these are just some examples of the way in which it's sort of been taking off. And you're all familiar with things like this. One of the interesting things I thought was just the scale of investment. Apparently, from a defense funding point of view, there's been a shift over the last few years from hardware into software. And now there's this ramping up huge investment by the government in AI. So if you look at the size of some of these contracts, US Army, $22 billion contract with Microsoft. So this huge investment now in AI coming from the sort of military industrial complex. And this example here of a self-driving car, a self-driving plane. And, well, what could go wrong? Creepy. I don't know why, BMW looking at having these on its shop floor. I mean, if they're anything guaranteed to make workers worry, I mean, this is it. I mean, just creepy. AI is producing books. I thought this was interesting. One of the most disgusting meals I've ever tasted came from this recipe book created by AI. And he tried it out. Revenge of the Humans here, a little bit, 3 ratings and only one star, but completely generated by AI. At the same time, we're seeing it sort of come into production use in various ways. A variety of companies, Walmart, for example, using it to do sort of routine work, to do updates, to do data merging, and so on. It's popping up everywhere to help you. I submitted something recently to somebody they'd asked me to write, and they sent it back asking for changes, and I said, well, no, Word thinks it's 100% okay. But then, we were looking for somewhere to live recently, and instead of looking at various sites, I just asked ChatGPT, I just asked Microsoft Copilot, and it would go away and summarize the Realtor.com and Zillow and so on. WhatsApp now has a chatbot built in using Llama. So if you're a WhatsApp user, you can ask questions of, at the moment, it'll have to catch up again, quite a simple chatbot, but actually, quite interesting. One of my standard questions is comparing the Irish diaspora in the UK and the US, and it gave a reasonable response. Jobs happening everywhere. People are recruiting people. I thought this one was interesting. I mean, whatever about recruiting somebody for AI, I think they have a problem if they're recruiting somebody to help them adopt ideas. Henry Farrell, a social scientist, is one of the more interesting writers about AI and the impact of AI. This came out the other day on his Substack. He has an article in The Economist. And he said, really, AI is really suitable for doing mundane, routine things. So we're talking the other day about evaluations. How many people have AI write their evaluation materials? Ethan Mollick was talking about references. He said somebody sent him a prompt and said, here's a prompt that will write me a good reference. Could you do this and then amend it as you see fit? I am sure now that I think in the UK, they've sort of done away with some of those personal statements on college admissions because they were all being written by, create me a profile that makes me sound interest with varied experience and life hardships that I've overcome miraculously to arrive at this point. They stopped doing it. But you can see in admissions, a lot of the references and various other things you wonder about them. But I thought this was quite interesting. Because of the way they work, quite often the responses you get, if you don't sort of spend a lot of time on the prompt, will be maximally unsurprising outcomes. It sort of goes almost by definition for a sort of lowest common denominator. At the same time, in education, huge investment. I think the University of Michigan is an example. Several institutions have done this now. They've set up local infrastructure where they have loaded ChatGPT, various other language models. They have begun loading various tools. They will allow you customize them, upload your own data, develop your own sort of custom applications against it, you know, a prompt library. When we think about prompts, we tend to think about just putting in prompts, but, you know, prompts can be quite complicated, automatic systems and so on, putting in prompts, machines putting in prompts. So this type of infrastructure, quite interesting. And, you know, it's a balance, I'm sure. You know, to what extent is this investment warranted? To what extent will it be passed out by just what's available as a commodity? But it's interesting that they have put this up, major investment, and you can contract with them. You can get support, you can get advice. You can work with several large language models. You can work to develop your own applications. Yale just announced a $150 million investment over the next few years in AI, partly doing some of this stuff, partly doing education and training. And as on this campus, we're seeing a lot of interest in people developing courses. So Arizona State University, obviously very focused on convenience and has a range now of, you know, graduate programs with an AI focus, continuing education, other things. So you can see this happening everywhere. So the other horrible outcome is we're seeing all these horrible AI-generated pictures on articles in Fortune and so on, or, you know, blog entries. You know, they've got this horrible AI picture that's sort of a cross between Star Wars and a Victorian living room or something. But anyway, this is asking ChatGPT to give me a picture of the genie out of the bottle in the style of Picasso. But the genie is out of the bottle. We've got broad-based experimentation, broad-based use. And again, you all know this, but I think when you step back and look at the variety of things, it really is quite interesting. So this is from an analysis looking at Reddit, looking at a variety of other things to see what people are actually using AI for. And personalized kid story comes in at number 33, so it is a thing. If you look more closely, it's not surprising what the top things are: technical assistance, content creation, personal and professional support, learning, education, creativity. You know, not too surprising. Slightly disturbing is number 2, therapy and companionship. I mean, it'd be cheaper. I don't know about the companionship. Don't know. But it's sort of interesting, again, that sort of range. So I'm just curious, how many people here would have used, say, one of ChatGPT regularly? And other large language models, Claude? Anybody use Perplexity? Anybody got a tool that's now absolutely essential? No. Anybody using it as a therapist? Anybody here a robot? You're all human. However, you know, we know this. They're built using labor practices where you've got people on low pay and various parts of the world, you know, checking stuff, doing some of the reinforcement learning, doing some of the ways in which they're monitoring for bias and so on. There's a power consumption issue. And also, increasingly, we're looking at, you know, Google and Microsoft and Amazon, you know, controlling more of the world we occupy, which, depending on your perspective, obviously, if you're from Seattle, it's a good thing. But depending on your perception, it's a terrible thing. I think one of the major things to have emerged now is really, are we looking at products or features? You know, this has been around for some time. And then is it disruptive or sustaining? So if you think about some examples, the scholarly discovery systems, and I'll give some examples later, you know, presumably you're all getting adverts and daily bulletins from Clarivate and, you know, Ex Libris or Dimensions about their AI-enabled, you know, activity. You may be JSTOR, you may be experimenting with them doing things. That's largely sustaining. They don't want to innovate. They don't want to change their systems very much. They have to be cautious. They want to give good results. So they're moving very slowly and very cautiously to integrate, you know, summarization and various other things because they can't. They don't want to suddenly have hallucinations and various other things. By the way, one of my recent bios said that I was the librarian emeritus at UW. So obviously that's an honor that's in my future somewhere maybe. Google versus, I was also the director of the National Library of Australia. So Google versus Perplexity. You know, Google obviously worried. They rushed out with stuff that was badly prepared, and they were afraid to disrupt their own business. I mean, the obvious thing for Google to do would have been to have produced, you know, really nice new services that move the model in various ways. But they have this huge advertising model tied to a particular way of doing things. They have search, which has been hugely successful. So Google is in this bind of, you know, not quite knowing what to do. So they release this sort of half-done stuff that doesn't really work very well. They have the Gemini and so on built in now. It's sort of sometimes useful. Perplexity, on the other hand, has become very popular and is genuinely useful. Having said that, they've run into issues because they're accused of stealing content and doing various other things. So what will happen to Perplexity? Will Perplexity continue and become more successful, or will somebody just buy it? Will Google buy it and smother it? Will you know, OpenAI end up buying it? You know, so the future of Perplexity is really, really quite interesting. But if you think, you know, Google is adding AI's features, Perplexity is effectively a product. So what is the future going to be? And Apple is really, really interesting in this context. Apple didn't rush out of the gate like Microsoft with all this new stuff. Apple played it slowly. They have a huge amount of money. They can afford to wait. And what they've done is they've introduced AI comprehensively as a feature. They're saying, we're just going to make everything better. We're going to sort of slowly see whether we can integrate it in ways that just improve our current platform, make our current platform more sticky, do a variety of things to sort of make it better. Microsoft, on the other hand, sort of said, you know, tried to do some flashy things, tried to do, you know, had a couple of misfires, have settled back into now making it more of a feature throughout Office and various things. Having said that, I find Microsoft Copilot very interesting. It's my first search choice now. I search in Microsoft Copilot before Google because it's just, now it's a bit slow. Grammarly, really interesting case. Is there a future for Grammarly? Or will ChatGPT just do it all for you? And Grammarly, the people in Grammarly are probably really, really running very hard to say, how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we continue to add value and make value for people? Will they just be able to give their document or ask ChatGPT questions in the future that do everything that Grammarly does? So what we have at the moment is this really all these commercial organizations, you know, are we developing new products? Are we stepping out doing new things? Are we just enhancing what we have? People like Grammarly, you know, really thinking, you know, how do we differentiate ourselves from vanilla ChatGPT? I got, just thinking about products, I have a subscription to ReadCube, Papers by ReadCube. Those of you responsible for providing services, ReadCube, much nicer than Zotero or Mendeley. So I have a personal subscription, not very much, to ReadCube. I got a note this morning about their AI version, about how you can talk to PDFs, how it will summarize things, looking at your library, how it will do things for you. Very confusing, by the way, because it's not clear whether I have to pay more or whether I get it as part of my current thing or whether, but, you know, so they are featurizing digital science. It's a digital science product. They're featurizing all their products with AI. Okay. So when we turn to think about AI, we've got this terrible polarity of views, and it's fomented by sort of clickbait and a sci-fi view of the world. All those clickbait articles about AI, just terrible. And you have this sort of techno-optimism on the one hand versus existential risk on the other. You have this discussion about AGI, artificial general intelligence, you know, how it'll become more, which is sort of a bit of a distraction or something, I think. You know, it's an undefined future state. But so a lot of the popular discussion is sort of, you know, very boosterish or very gloomish, you know, and what's happening though is to some extent that obscures the fact that we're having to make choices today, you know, about the composition and transparency of training collection, what goes into large language models. If you're buying products, you should have a view about what goes into the large language models, and you know, be informed. You know, there's all the discussion about hidden labor. The interests of creators and consumers really very interesting because it's just not clear at the moment. If you want to advocate for your scholars in particular ways, it's quite complicated, and I'll say a bit about copyright in a moment. But you know, if as a library, the role, part of the role of the library is to make research more productive, to advocate for the interests of scholars, not entirely clear where you land here, but it's a question that should be discussed. You want to support a more diverse ecosystem than just OpenAI and Google. Understanding vendor offerings is going to become a much bigger issue. You know, what exactly are you buying here when it says AI? Licensing, developing research skills, you're obviously been looking at that very closely. And organization. So this is what I mean by the messy middle. There are all these questions that you have to think about and work through and develop answers. And it's not easy because there's an awareness and educational issue, and you've been looking at this in the task force activity. The second sort of issue is this unhelpful mental model. We have artificial intelligence is a terrible name because intelligence suggests this, you know, so I asked ChatGPT, create an image which encapsulates the common view of artificial intelligence. You get a humanoid robot with a holographic brain, or looking at a holographic brain. And so this is the popular image of AI. And it's totally misleading because that's not, you know, AI is not, you know, there aren't these, you know, you may have a vacuum cleaner that wanders around the room, but it's not going to take over your life. So large language models are not databases or search engines. In a nice phrase that I should have credited, they're curation by statistics. We're increasingly seeing this, how knowledge, the cultural technologies we used are being curated by statistics. Various changes in the algorithm will move the results in particular ways. So Stephen Harnad, obviously hugely influential in our field because of open access. And he sort of retreated from open access, as people probably know, in the last few years, returned to some of his more cognitive science roots and animal rights. He's very interested in animal rights. But he's been looking at ChatGPT, and he's just written this article, which is entirely based on a dialogue between him and ChatGPT. So he's asking ChatGPT questions, and his big thing is symbol grounding. He's talking about what does being intelligent actually mean? And so he asks the ChatGPT, various questions. ChatGPT responds and says, yes, what we do is we create statistical patterns from vast data sets. And this means because we have all this language, because we have all this stuff, we can mimic understanding because we have learned patterns and contexts. So because they have all this language, because they've harvested all the web, they've harvested all this other stuff, they can mimic understanding because they know all the words and all the orders of the words and how you can put words together. But that means they don't have conscious comprehension, intentionality, experiential context. They can't experience the world. They don't, and that's why there's a big interest in robotics and so on, and connecting these things to sensory experiences to give them more well-rounded experience, as it were. They don't have self-awareness, consciousness, or the ability to experience. So there is a ceiling here, and various writers have said there's a ceiling here. You're going to need a different type of technology to get past that ceiling. Karol Gopnik talks about these as new cultural technologies that allow you to encapsulate a variety of ways of knowledge and so on and share that. But she says they no more understand than other cultural technologies. The library in Berkeley is a cultural technology. It doesn't understand the world. It helps you understand the world. And this, the Wolfram AI guy, it's just saying things that sound right based on what things sounded like in the training material it has. And this is why you've got harm and bias, because a lot of the stuff that it collects, well, it's not very nice. So we know then that it's not quite good enough for many real life needs. It's probabilistic rather than deterministic. It's like programming. You don't tell it, I want this, I want that. It goes into the big model and it does things. Lots of things are plausible or appear right, and harmful results are a feature of the way it works. Hallucination, large language models work by hallucinating. And then most of their hallucinations match up to the world. Some of them don't, and those are the ways we call it. But the way it works is it's creating statistical patterns in all of this language. It's not actually referencing the world. And lots of the things that we're seeing are trying to overcome that. In our space, what we're seeing is, the fine-tuning the large language models. You can add specialist data. And a variety of companies, a variety of organizations are doing that. They're adding specialist data internally. Large companies may add local data and run that alongside ChatGPT. Retrieval augmented generation, and some of you will be familiar with this. This is the big thing. This is what most of the players in our space are doing. Most of the discovery systems in our space are doing. What they're doing is they're doing a search against a resource, pulling back the search, and then using that search as part of the prompt to a large language model. So if you think about what Clarivate's doing, what Dimensions is doing, what these other organizations are doing, this is a large part of what they're doing. And then you have just the context window. The context window is the amount of stuff you can give to the large language model in a prompt. Now, the context windows have got so big, you can put a novel in. You can put a huge, big, so you can actually tell the large language model, I want you to think about this in the context of all these documents I've given you. So these are ways of influencing the large language model. And all three of them are heavily used now in our space. The middle one, that's really the dominant model for how the big vendors are doing things. Although I'll say a bit about. So this is using Perplexity, which uses RAG, uses retrieval augmented generation. So I can limit the search to this site, which is my website. So I ask it, what is the inside out collection? So what it does is it looks at my website, searches my website, finds stuff, and then gives that to the large language model to summarize and do something, and then comes back with the result. So it's grounding, if you like, the results from the large language model in actual retrieval. So it's using both. And as I say, if you look at various of the products in our space, this is what they're doing. They're combining retrieval and the large language model. And this is actually not a bad result. Now, the reason I use myself in examples is partly, just vanity and ego, but it's partly because I know my own. I know what a good answer is. This is Consensus. Does anybody use Consensus? It's one of these new startups. So it'll either go away or it will be bought by somebody. It's unlikely to be big enough to really. So what it does is, what is the status of the collective collection in academic libraries? So it gives me a summary. It goes out, it has a range of resources, mostly open access, but then it may have some licensed stuff. It's found 7 papers, and it summarizes. These studies suggest that collective collections in academic libraries are becoming increasingly important, with a shift towards flexible, sustainable, whatever. Then, in another stage, it analyzes those 7 and summarizes, and it gives me references. So it points me to where they are. So what we're seeing is, I think, the beginning, and some of you may have seen Lisa Hinchliffe writing in Scholarly Kitchen recently, a different way of interacting with information resources. And that's something I think that would be very important for libraries. People are going to start interacting with resources in different ways. This is Dimensions, the people who do various applications, Bigshare, Symplectic, Recube, as well as Dimensions. And what they've done is they have loaded into ChatGPT a load of literature. If you have a subscription to Dimensions, they will search that and then use ChatGPT. If you don't have a subscription, they will search open access material and then. So what you have here is summarize Lorcan Dempsey's main contributions to library and information science studies. So obviously this took a long time for the query to be carried out, but it actually, what it does is it just knows about several articles. So it gives me back something based on those several articles. It's not bad. And it's a way of just shortcutting stuff, doing things quickly. If I had a subscription to Dimensions, I would have got a better result, or a better query would have worked. So all of these products, JSTOR in there as well. I don't know what sort of communications people in the library are getting, whether you're getting a note every day from Clarivate about their AI stuff, or every 3 days, or every 2.5 days. But they're all introducing AI products that are based in some way on the ability to work with a large language model and a set of more structured data together. So as I say, I think we're looking at a new summarization and prospecting layer, basically a new way, a different way of looking at things. Currently I'm supposed to be writing a response to this document, which is on the web, on the iSchool web. It's the LIS forward. It's looking at the future of LIS schools the future of library information studies in iSchools. So it's sitting out there on the web, on the iSchool. I read it and I immediately thought of Pierre Bourdieu, this French social scientist who writes about prestige, who writes about how in an academic setting, different disciplines have different levels of prestige. And part of the problem with library studies is it has low prestige in an R1 institution. It doesn't have a lot of research funding, it's practice oriented, it's feminized, so it has low prestige in a research type of environment. And this is what he writes about. He talks about symbolic capital and cultural capital. If you win a Nobel Prize, you've got very high cultural capital. If you're an ALA fellow, you've got very low cultural capital, in the academic sort of setting. So I gave ChatGPT this document and said, give me a 300-word summary of how Bourdieu's theoretical analysis in Homo academicus is applicable to this document. And it did this, in a few seconds. So this is how I'm sure people are going to be reading or thinking about things. I mean, this is a slightly contrived example. This result, I'm not going to publish it in an article, but it's perfectly fine for my needs. It tells me it's a reasonable summary of a position. And I don't care if it gets something a little bit wrong, because it's good enough for what I need. Okay. So understanding is based on experiencing. What is this library? It's not the long haul, but it's nearly the long haul. So the long haul in Trinity College Dublin is the most photographed library in the world. If you see an article in the New York Times about a library, 50% of the time it has a picture of the long haul in Trinity. I just hope they get a lot of money for it. So it's sort of like a canonical library because it's got books and statues and wood. And that's what people think libraries are. They're places with books and statues and wood. All the statues are of men. And the current librarian, Helen Shenton, was saying that she hoped in the renovation that a couple of them would be knocked over and broken so that they could be replaced by women's statues. And they've actually now had a competition to say, if we're going to replace 3 of these distinguished men by Irish scholarly women, who should we replace them with? And I can't remember what the results were. But anyway, it's currently being refurbished. So this is not the long haul, but it's obviously influenced by the long haul. It's going back to what I said earlier. This is the lowest common denominator library, you know. And it's because I just said create an image of a library. So if you think about all of the stuff it has, it's going to come back with a sort of stereotype, which is the center of gravity of what people think about libraries. And the long haul is sort of, but then you've got the funny things like, this should be a statue of a male philosopher, and it sort of looks like a hybrid mutant animal. Similarly, up there, it looks like there's a zombie on top of that ladder, and who knows what this is. So it sort of gets various things. So you just ask it something simple, it's going to give you a lowest common denominator answer. You sort of get a bit more sophisticated. Assume the persona of a Scandinavian architect who has designed several flagship libraries in Nordic countries. Show me the image. So here we get is, I mean, it's sort of moved on a bit and it's understood, but it's sort of slightly stereotypically Nordic. It's very clean, and from a health and safety point of view, this is a bit awkward. There's no railing, so you might just fall off the mezzanine floor there. But it just shows you how it's given me a very different response because I gave it a sort of different. Now, I was in Victoria, and I thought I'd really go to town. So I sort of wrote a novel here as a prompt. You're a young Canadian architect, sensitive to cultural appropriation, want to make an impact in sustainability, placemaking, integration of nature, architecture. Respect the unique geopolitical culture of the Pacific Northwest. Show me your mock-up of the inside of a new public library in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island. And this is what it gave me. So quite different again. But I showed this to a Canadian audience, and what was their response? It had ignored the cultural appropriation, they felt. So you have this. My response, does anybody know what my response was? Totally implausible. Where is Nanaimo going to get the money to build something of this scale unless they have a huge amount of money coming in? And well, yes. I mean, I have the dot here because yes, the doorway is straight into the ocean. Yeah, and also there's cactus. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about cactus on Vancouver Island, but anyway, it's a better thing. And then you've got sort of funny things. That looks like a borrower or a user with wings, but I don't know. But anyway, the point is that you need to spend time experimenting, ask about areas where you have knowledge, suggest a persona. It gets a lot better. Refine the prompt, give examples and see what happens, give instructions for the structure of the answer. I want the answer in this way. And some of you will have looked at this very closely. Use different tools because they give quite, and you will see a difference between stuff you pay for and stuff you don't. It's just the way of the world. There's been a lot of discussion about prompt engineering. I think most of it overblown. There's not going to be there is a value, people who can do things, but it's not like going to be the new librarianship. Having said that, I think it is interesting how, if you think about the reference interview and the skills in the reference interview, I think prompt engineering is very interesting in that context, because the whole point of prompt engineering is you're having a discussion with an assistant and you're trying to tease out what it is you're looking for. You're trying to give it enough information. You're trying to give it instructions. You're trying to tell it how, you're trying to steer it in particular ways. So prompt engineering, really very interesting, but not quite in the way we've talked about. And I think more and more is going to be integrated and it's going to be helped with. But that parallel did strike me. So very quickly, a couple of library topics. So social confidence and trust. So we talk about literacies, meta-literacies, information, data, LLM literacies, Really what we're talking about is social confidence and trust, the extent to which you can be confident in terms of particular views about things, confident that your interpretation of things are right, confident that you're seeing what's really there, trusting that you have. So I think social confidence and trust is a very important part of how libraries interact with their constituencies in terms of helping those constituencies have a certain level of social confidence and trust. But this really is center to the impact of large language models. So if you think about, what's happening, and various of you will have seen this. How many of you saw this? Kara Swisher's book. As soon as Kara Swisher's book was produced, she got all of these fake versions, various things appearing on Amazon. And apparently, I was listening to the podcast. Her mother called her and said, "Do you know, X or Y is on Amazon?" Amazon, this is a big problem for Amazon, apparently. There are lots now of AI-generated materials, some counterfeit, some not. And they introduced a new rule a while ago, and I think it's that you can only put up 3 things a day, which is crazy. I mean, as if anybody could write 3 novels a day. So they've limited. So instead of putting up your usual 100 novels, you can put up 3, which, seems like anyway. But, we're seeing, fake identities in social media, misinformation in the year of elections, although it hasn't been as bad as I thought it might be, Trump's tweets notwithstanding. Accelerated scamming, phishing, enormous volumes of synthetic content. I'm sure, with Cindy on a committee looking at admissions, MLIS, I'm sure a lot of those letters of recommendation were created by ChatGPT. Now, does that matter? If the person who wrote them is willing to stand over them, no, I think it's like a calculator. But I don't know. It's quite interesting. Essays, news. We're surrounded by all of this synthetic news being pumped out. I use the, being interested in diversity, I use the Edge browser as well as Chrome. And the homepage they give you is horrible. I've spent some time telling it, here are my refined, sophisticated, cosmopolitan interests. And I'm getting American football, Taylor Swift all the time. And I'm thinking, well, but what about my, and it's all just, now, maybe it's looking at my searches, I don't know. My Google stream is better, but we're surrounded now by synthetic news, synthetic content. And, a lot of the time we just take it for granted. The two of the biggest areas where LLMs have had an impact is marketing and coding. Coding, just for people to say, what's the problem here? Can I do this a different way? Can you tell me? And marketing. It's people are using it to create marketing materials to do things. Some of you may have seen this a while ago. I think really quite a sensationalist article in the Scientific American. It's an example of scholarly clickbait. They were talking about, and this is based on a UK study by somebody in, I can't remember where, Senate House or somewhere, but just remarking on the way in which papers submitted, a lot of them bear the traces of having been helped by ChatGPT, and things like people forgetting to delete, certainly here is a possible introduction to your topic. And it going on the article. The worst thing is it goes through the refereeing process, So, but this article made quite a splash. Having said that, I don't think it was as horrifying as some of the news was making it out to be. But it says that there are particular words, because ChatGPT goes to the mean, because it goes to the center of gravity, it tends, and there was, who was it? Some journalist got into trouble because he said, or was it the Y Combinator guy, Paul Graham? If you see something with delve, the word delve in it, he said, over 50% chance that's ChatGPT. And all of a sudden he got all of this protest from Nigeria and various places. No, delve, we use it all the time. What do you mean? And whatever. But what they're saying is, you see some words, and it's a sort of clue that anyway. Now, this is really interesting, I think. So on the one hand, the library point of view is that scholarship is built on the shoulders of giants. You should be able to, and the whole discussion about what you can do with full text content that comes from publishers. You want to reserve rights to do data mining, to do analysis of that. So coming from that stream of thinking, this group of ARL, ALA, the Library Copyright Alliance, has said, training generative AI models on copyrighted works is fair use. So because it's contributing to a cultural technology, it's contributing to the sum of knowledge, it's allowing us to do interesting things. So that's one strand of thought, versus I think a lot of library people would feel, they're stealing our stuff, they're monetizing our stuff, they're doing unfair things with our stuff. So you've got this very interesting discussion where we're not sure where it's going to end up. And you've probably seen a couple of publishers now have announced that they've licensed materials to ChatGPT, one of whom saying we're just doing it. I think Wiley has said we're going to do it. We might share something back with the authors. I can't remember, but publishers are now doing deals with ChatGPT. But you've got these two strains of thinking that I think are unresolved in the library space. So from a social confidence and trust point of view, we've got a sort of information literacy, meta-literacy perspective, but it's really very broad in this new environment. It throws into question lots of things: identity, appraisal. I was thinking more of the appraisal, archival appraisal, deciding what types of things are appropriate for collections when you've got all of this synthetic material, harvesting and use of creative works. How do you advise scholars and researchers about whether or not they should allow? When I asked ChatGPT to go and get that LIS forward document, it told me it was on a part of the website it wasn't allowed to look at, which was quite interesting. So what advice do you give faculty about, how to, what's the disposition of their work on the web? Information confidence. How much confidence do you have in something? If you're using it for one purpose, it doesn't matter if it's 80% right. If you're using it for another purpose, it very much does. The policy environment is changing all the time. You've got government mandates, publisher mandates, institutional mandates, tools and techniques for creators, pedagogy and research, lots of difference, algorithmic literacies, strategies for harm reduction, given the way, and then rights and opportunities as creators. There's a balance there, and I think it's an interesting one. Okay, I need to wrap up. This is a sort of big, long-term question for libraries, and it comes back to what I said about appraisal. You can think about AI as a cultural synthesizer. So we had synthesizers in music. A lot of people didn't like them, and now they're part of the musical environment. Now we have cultural synthesizers. We have synthesizers in the cultural sphere. What is our view of those? Are they part of the scholarly record? Are they part of the cultural record? Does it depend? So we live, we'll get on to that in a minute. So this is from Getty Images, and it's sort of a survey. And it's the most awful picture. I mean, but it doesn't go with the article. It doesn't go with the text at all. What they're saying is people are now much more interested in authenticity. They want to know that an image is real. They want to, so Getty, obviously given its huge financial and cultural interest here, did this survey. And they want something that is genuine, expressing true thoughts, not fake, something that's sincere. But how do you know? It's like a Turing test. If I'm using you as a therapist and you come across as sincere, well, okay. Now, in real life, I know you're not sincere at all, but that's the, so the Getty Images comes up with this. But then it seems to me they put out this report that's got all this awful imagery in it that doesn't, it sort of undermines. We've got new cultural products that allow you to do things. This is, you can invent characters, interact with them, talk to them, create stories out of them. So we live in Columbia City, recently moved, but so there's a very nice sort of gallery that is sort of a community-owned, and it rotates collections and people come in. And they had this exhibition on AI. And I didn't realize it was AI when I walked in first. And I saw this and I thought, that is really lovely. I thought this was very poignant, very nice. So what happened though was the person who created it gave several prompts to, what is it, an Adobe tool, was it Photoshop? So they got back a basis for doing something, and then they put the window frame on it. So it's a hybrid work, if you like. It's a combination between prompting, Photoshop, and the eventual production. Whatever it is, I thought that was actually quite touching. And I mean, I would have bought it if it wasn't $6,000 or something. But then alongside this, you've got all these horrible things, that really are, like dolphins on zebras, that sort of art form that's, sub-Dali-esque. And I wouldn't have wanted any of those in my home, but this was one of them. But the point is, we're looking at an era of cultural synthesis. And what do we do about it? So from a library point of view, you're already doing these things, using GBT, thinking about policies or finding aids to expose them, thinking about manipulating digital resources. We will end up with co-pilots for a lot of the work we do, or assistants, I think. Imagine what a cataloging co-pilot would be like. I think Ex Libris is marketing one now. Are they? ETL, extract, transform, load, all the data work that goes on with knowledge bases and all of that type of stuff will get smoother. Analytics, decision support. So it's going to become a sustaining element of so much more. And you're going to rely on vendors to do that, most of it. Some of it, might be able to do. So it becomes important to ask the type of questions that you are doing. One thing I think that is quite important is library websites. I think they need to become much more narrative. They need actually to say what we do, what our value is, hear stories, connect with campus agendas, because the stuff is going to be harvested. People are going to be asking questions, so you want to make sure that connections are made. I will finish just by saying, we're looking at a new era, I think, of interaction with the scholarly literature and open access, because these large companies will be able to do things with their corpus that other people can't, and people will want to use them. So it opens up another front on the open access discussion, on the access to literature discussion. And finally, the future is the future. My example is the selfie. Who could have thought what would have, think about a selfie. The transformed travel, transformed tourism, major impact on mental health and wellness. So we don't know what's going to happen, because the future is the future. So thank you. Are we done?
So thank you, everybody. We're at the top of that.